Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. This time I'm coming your way to review a more recent movie, which is something that doesn't happen that often on this channel. Basically last year, I don't know if it would have been October, November, or whatever, not exactly sure even when this movie came out, but at some point within recent months, the trailer basically ended up materializing on the worldwide internet for this movie. And honestly, when I having, looked at it, this is the most recent film from Robert Zemeckis, who I think it's fair to say has quite a interesting and good, more or less, at least in the earlier years, maybe in the 80s and the early 90s. Really good track record and really creative filmmaker who at the time was really kind of pushing the boundaries and challenging visual effects and doing all this kind of stuff. And I don't think I'd really necessarily seen I can't even remember the most recent movie of his I would have even seen. A lot of the stuff he's done recently. Oh, I guess maybe is it The Polar Express? That might be the most recent movie he saw back after I got just in the years following me getting the 3D TV and 3D Blu-ray player. I actually was at Target and I actually picked up that movie he did, like Walk, the one with about the guy doing the walking in on the wire in between the World Trade Centers. I actually was walking around the store with the 3D Blu-ray in my hand, and I'm just like, you know what? I'll probably, who the hell, it was decently priced, and it was like 3D Blu-ray, and I'm like, this is probably going to be one of those movies I'll watch once and never want to see again. So I put it back. I've never seen. Is it The Walk? I want to say The Walk or something, but. Yeah, so the Polar Express might be the most recent until I saw this movie, Robert Zemeckis movie I had seen. But, arguably like Back to the Future and, the trilogy and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and actually like Death Becomes Her quite a bit. Those movies I hold in relatively high regard. And for me, I guess he went a little, when he entered into the Forrest Gump era and the post-Forrest Gump era, maybe I didn't love so much of what he did. I saw Castaway at the time and stuff, so I've seen a decent and What Lies Beneath and stuff. I've seen a decent amount of Robert Zemeckis movies, and what was that one with the CG one, the Beowulf or whatever? Wasn't too keen on Beowulf or whatever, but then he was in this era of doing like these CG movies and kind of had laughable motion capture compared to what Cameron did in Avatar and all this. Anyway, geez, can I talk about this movie? I'm basically stopping on by to review Robert Zemeckis' latest film by the name of Here. Basically, when I saw the trailer for Here, I was actually really impressed. I'm like, what a great idea. And this movie, from what I could understand based on the trailer, was just a movie that was going to be, I was really hoping it was what I, thought it would be based on the trailer. Turns out it was, which was pretty cool. A movie basically, an hour and 45 minutes that just basically is one shot in time. And it's just this one camera angle, this one shot. And it basically starts in, the dinosaur era of the dinosaur land of the dinosaurs, and basically the meteor that just wiped out the dinosaurs, and we get to see that. We get to see this one spot in time over the course of hundreds of years. Just kidding. I mean, the dinosaurs were purported to exist, whatever it was, quite a few million years ago or whatever. If I had a Jurassic Park poster, I could look at that, but several million years ago. And so the movie basically starts, way back bazillions of millions of years ago at the extinction of the dinosaurs. And, the trailer kind of made it, the one thing that was great about the trailer is it kind of did convey more or less what the movie was, where it was going to be just jumping back and forth between different times, starting way back then, and jump forward ahead and just to see different times of this one spot. And basically happens to be a house ends up being built there, and it's more or less like the living room of this one house that was built in if I'm remembering correctly, the early 20th century, or I think so. So the history of this one spot in on Earth over I think it's probably more than 100 years time over this well, I guess millions, millions of years if you count the beginning of the movie with the dinosaurs and stuff. But of course, this movie was, I can't remember I don't know if Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis have worked together since Castaway. I didn't really care enough to follow. It might be the first time they reconnected since Castaway, but one of the big, marketing things with this movie is not only Tom Hanks returning with Robert Zemeckis, but Tom Hanks and the chick he starred with in Forrest Gump return both to be in another Robert Zemeckis movie. I don't really care one way or another about that woman who was in Forrest Gump per se, but it was, I think, a kind of little bit of the marketing gimmick. For the first time reunited since Forrest Gump, with Robert Zemeckis once again. But of course, one of the big things about this movie is the use of de-aging digital technology on Tom Hanks, of course, and the other characters that appear in the film. And I will say, for the most part, it looks pretty good, except for they still can't get the mouths right for shit. I want to say, the first time you really see Tom Hanks close de-aged is he starts talking and his mouth just looks funky. So to me, if he's close to camera, maybe they shouldn't have had him talk much. But I'd say for the most part, the de-aging, it was fine. They still got a ways to go on getting the mouth stuff to work, but the de-aging was kind of interesting, and honestly, the context of the film, kind of seamless. But honestly, what's interesting about this movie is, I don't know how much, Robert Zemeckis, for a while there, it seemed like he was going to ditch actual photography altogether for the rest of his career and just do CG stuff. But what's interesting about this is, he kind of, in a way, it was like a melding of digital cinema, if you will, and traditional cinema, where obviously the whole thing could be done indoors in one studio, one setup or whatever, and because it just all took place in one spot, he could do it all indoors. And just like with his CG films, like Polar Express and Beowulf and of the like or whatever, movies like that, just like with those, he didn't really have to go outside or worry about location shooting or weather or any of this and that. It's kind of a easy movie to make in those aspects. But what's interesting about the movie is obviously Robert Zemeckis, kind of like James Cameron in a way, was always kind of interested in pushing or challenging the technical, limitations of cinema, which is one of the things that, I kind of really always enjoyed with him, just really pushing the limits in Back to the Future, certainly Roger Rabbit and Death Becomes, or even, with kind of cutting edge technology. So it was really interesting to see how he used it, and I thought it was used really well in Forrest Gump, and basically green screening away or visually taking away Gary Sinise's legs and stuff. I'm like, wow, at the time I was like, what a great use of visual effects just to do something that, kind of serves, I guess, something really subtle that really serves the story or drives a point home or whatever. So Robert Zemeckis has always used kind of, visual effects, in my opinion, in a way that was kind of maybe not so common, and this is another case where he kind of seamlessly is able to, cut between millions and millions of years and hundreds and years, and, it gets to be where it's like less and less, maybe throughout the course of the movie, just mere decades cutting back and forth or whatever. But even after like the dinosaurs, we do see like the Native American, a little bit with the Native Americans, on the land before it becomes, quote unquote, developed by by non-Native Americans, I guess I'll just simply say. But it was the movie was what I kind of hoped it would be. I was able to see it for no additional cost on Netflix, so that's always fun when you can see this stuff for more or less. You can't really call it free if you're paying for streaming services, but I call it no additional cost. So this is something I kind of, when I saw the trailer, I kind of pondered, is this good enough to get my ass off the couch or into a movie theater? And I kind of pondered it. I'm like, I don't think so. Luckily, it was something that I didn't bother with in the theater because it's not something I it takes a lot to get my ass into the theater seats these days, and the more I go to the theater, the more I'm just like, why am I going to the theater? But I don't go to the theater much these days, I'm afraid. But it was one of these movies that I figured would be, the kind of the Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks, whatever you want to call it, maybe more of the shallow. You knew it was going to be like the shallow. What's the word? The sensibility, or the word escapes me right now. Oh, the sentimentality. Yeah, the kind of the shallow Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks sentimentality. And honestly, I figured by the end of the movie it'd probably, turn on my waterworks, and sure enough it did. Me and Beth watched this together, and I want to say that, by the end of the movie it did, there were points throughout the course of the movie where, the waterworks, definitely were engaged. But the way it ended, I mean, they kind of, you kind of have to make some, with a movie that really doesn't have beginning, a middle, and end. You have to have some kind of a significant thing to punctuate it, and they came up with a decent thing to punctuate it. Where I guess, I don't know how realistic it was, but I won't ruin it. But I'll just simply say they came up with a punctuation thing that was kind of poignant or whatever. And I was also going to ruin something, but regarding the end, but I won't ruin it. I try not to, especially if a movie's newer, I try not to ruin it. But I did find, it was interesting how well the trailer conveyed the whole movie, and I was glad the movie turned out to be like I was thinking it was just these different, going back and forth with different families and different time eras and stuff. And one thing, and the funny thing is, you don't necessarily know what years, except for, well, I guess 2003 New Year's and this and that. But because of, I'll just simply say that there was a scene that, that I was just like, me and Beth were just like, oh, give me a break. And you can probably guess what year, had the movie take place. It was either 2020 or 2021, or in some people's cases, I guess, any year that follows after. But yeah, it's just like, come on, give me a break. And one thing that that I was kind of disappointed of, obviously, there was in the more current days, like more the times that take place like right around now. I'll just simply say, a black family lives in the house, and which is fine. I have no problem with that. It's just wonderful or whatever. But so I thought nothing of it until. And what's interesting about that family, I was surprised, especially these days, how little there actually was with the black family. Maybe, if I'm being generous, maybe 4 scenes. That they cut back from this and that, early 20th century, and maybe, if I'm being generous, 4 scenes with the black family, but one of them, and I was just like, come on, you've only got like 4 scenes, give or take, with the black family, and one of them was them sitting down with their teenage son on the couch, and informing them what to do if you're pulled over. Or I should say when you're pulled over by a cop, and what to do to basically avoid being shot. The just cooperate, always have, it was just like, it was, yeah, and it's just like, come on, why can't we just show just people, and all people in this movie, and not have to, I don't know, make a statement, I guess, is, some kind of a statement or whatever of the plight of a certain group. And it's just like, yeah, I found it a little preachy, I guess, is what I'll basically say. And I was disappointed about that, because of the limited screen time that they got. One of their few scenes had to be this preachy scene, and it's just like, oh man, I'm not saying that, it's something that they don't have to deal with. If they have to deal with that, that's unfortunate. They shouldn't have to deal with that. But it's just like, yeah, it was just one of them kind of things that was like, yeah, I don't need to be preached at about that. A little bit of a bummer, but yeah, I will say, like, I was wondering how they were going to do this creatively, and I think Beth was kind of like wondering how the hell you're going to exist for nearly 2 hours and do it. But I will say, they did it they did it well, and the transitions are kind of interesting between different times. In some cases, there'll be a box that'll focus on a prop, and the rest of the screen will kind of fade to the next one. And the transitions were a lot more interesting from different time periods to back and forth and stuff, because a lot of times the screen, focuses on something, and the rest of it will transition while this stays the same. And what they did with transitions was interesting. One more bit of criticism, like complaint, is like when we're dealing with like the Tom Hanks family house, it's kind of like, I'm not so sure. It's so funny, over all these decades, and even back to before the Tom Hanks family even lived there. Like, they'd have the radio over here, I guess, screen this way. What the hell would that have been? Yeah, the right side of the screen. And the radio would be there. And, of course, cut to TV era in the 50s or whatever, the TV's there. And what's just kind of goofy about the movie is, the TV was just all through the decades, except for maybe the 2000s or whatever. Well, even in 2003, the New Year's, the TV, and I think they had a widescreen CRT, which was kind of interesting. Those weren't that common. And I want to say in the scene that was like, New Year's Eve 2003, they might have had a widescreen CRT, which was funny. But the TV, until you get to the Black family's house, is always in the same spot, which I just thought was goofy. And like the telephone was just in the same spot, and that was kind of maybe a little not realistic. Like, people have been known to like move, stuff around over decades. I guess, maybe I don't do it so much, so maybe it is realistic. I don't know. But one thing I'll say before I end the review is, it occurred to me that I think the older you are, the more poignant this movie might be. Like, it occurred to me after it was over, like, yeah, teenager, this is a movie where you almost have to exist for maybe 30, 40, 50 years. I'm pretty close to the latter there. The more you exist, the more maybe poignant it'll be to you, because it's about time and the passage of time and the change that happens over time, and the heartbreaks and the good things and the bad things, and what's gained, what's lost. So like as a teenager, watching this, maybe they won't quite resonate with it as much as me and Beth did. By the end of the movie, I think it's fair to say both of our waterworks were relatively heavily engaged. And another thing that kind of harkens back to Forrest Gump, there's like a hummingbird that's kind of a motif throughout the movie that kind of reminded me of The Feather, which was just kind of like, come on. And then another thing I was like rolled my eyes on is, before, way back, in the Native American days, there was like a deer, and of course the deer enters the shot and just runs off, and it can't be a real deer. It's got to be a CG deer. Obviously the hummingbird's CG, and all this kind of stuff where we're just used to this being the case. Like, God forbid we actually get put a real deer in front of green screen or something. That wouldn't even occur to anyone in Hollywood these days. And it's just like, give me a break. Like, those little details of just seeing a CG deer, I can understand the CG hummingbird, I suppose, but CG deer, like, are you serious? Like, you can't just get a real deer. So that just shows how far we've come with like computer generated effects, and digital cinema is just like, it's just a foregone conclusion. There was probably no even discussion about it. Was this going to be a real deer or CG deer? Like, obviously CG. Why would we want something real in the movie? But my star rating, I think, was a little higher after it was over. But having thought about it and bitched about just now some of the lesser things, it's difficult because I'm not so on board with like maybe the shallow sensibility or sentiment or whatever. But I do recognize that, like, technically it's kind of an interesting achievement, and I'll give it some points for being like very different in that regard, of just being like one shot over millions of years, mostly decades, 100 years or whatever. I can go as high as I don't do this very often, 2 3/4 stars out of 4 stars. I think I was at 3 stars like after the movie, but I'm just like, you know, just maybe the more shallow sentimentality, you know, CG deer, stuff like that. Maybe bring it down, maybe just a notch below 3 stars to 2 3/4 stars out of 4. Even though I might complain about this movie's shallow sentimentality, the way it's done by just being this one shot over all of these years, hundreds of years or millions of years, whatever you want to say, thousands of years, all these years, there's something about it that's very quietly poignant, and I think it's one of these situations where it's you put this in front of someone, and like I say, depending on where they come from, and you know, any particular viewer comes from in their life, whether they're younger, I think, like I say, I think it'll work better if you're, the older you are, the more poignant I think this movie will be to you. But just the very simplistic style of this movie, by just being this one shot over all these years, hundreds, thousands, millions of years, has this very, very simple, almost like 2001: A Space Odyssey-ish kind of a simplicity to it that I think really, really makes it poignant. Alan Silvestri, that's how I've always pronounced his last name. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. He's still working with Robert Zemeckis. Unfortunately, there wasn't any themes that I think the heyday of Alan Silvestri has come and gone, but weren't any amazing. You know, just the kind of the once again, like just the, you know, when you're dealing with Tom Hanks, you know, Robert Zemeckis and Alan Silvestri, and it's post Forrest Gump. You know what kind of you know what you're gonna get. It's kind of going to be this mushy sentimentality that's, you know, like I say, kind of, in my opinion, the more shallow varieties. So it's like, you know, Alan Silvestri kind of just, you know, I didn't find the music as much as I love what he did back in the 80s and maybe a little bit in the 90s. Just, you know, like the score to Predator, I think, is just one of the all-time most amazing frickin' scores, and you know, say nothing of Back to the Future trilogy, and probably, I'm not so familiar with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but you know, I think you know, Alan Silvestri, I think, was doing stuff that I thought was a lot better in the you know, in the 80s and stuff. But yeah, I guess that'll be my review, which was probably too long. As you know, that can happen with me, especially if I'm just loco, you know, just currently just in the dead of winter in Minnesota, just suffering or whatever I'm currently going through. But I guess that'll be my review of here. It's definitely not something I ever feel like, unless I can get it for, you know, Blu-ray for $3 years down the road, something I don't feel like I necessarily need to own or necessarily. It's one of those movies where you really don't have to see it again. It's just like, you know, it's probably the most interesting the first viewing. You know, probably you might catch things maybe on multiple viewings or whatever. But yeah, it's not really, you know, I find that more and more these days, I guess, especially with newer movies, as I don't tend to like them all that much. Like, you know, if you just see, I guess with the exception of Thanksgiving, I watched that quite a bit last year in, you know, November or whatever. But you know, that's a rare occasion of a new movie, actually, me just kind of seeing it several times over and over. But for the most part, newer movies, if I see once, I, you know, don't really need to see, you know, necessarily ever again or that often. So I guess that'll pretty much do it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed and made it all the way through all this blabbing. If you did, thanks so much for watching. Even if you didn't, thanks so much for watching. I guess we'll catch you guys on the next video.